What does happen to a person's soul when they die? Well, prior to the resurrection of Jesus, when a person died, their soul went to a place called Sheol. And it didn't matter whether they were good or evil, everyone's soul went to this place called Sheol. Now, according to Numbers chapter 16, verses 30 through 33, Sheol is in the center of the earth, the heart of the earth. That's why Jesus said what he did in Matthew chapter 12, verse 40. Look back at that again. When he said, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. He's talking about his soul being in Sheol for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, Isaiah describes Sheol as a city with gates. You'll find that in Isaiah chapter 38, verse number 10. Job says that it has bars. You'll find that in Job chapter 17, verse 16 in the King James Version. Job also says that it's a land of darkness. Look at Job chapter 10, verses 19 through 22. If only I had never come into being or had been carried straight from the womb to the grave. Wow. Job was down. He'd lost everything. And you know what he's saying? I wish I'd never been born. Or if I had been born, that I would have died in childbirth. And then he goes further. Are not my few days almost over? Turn away from me so I can have a moment's joy before I go to the place of no return, to the land of gloom and utter darkness, to the land of deepest night of utter darkness and disorder, where even the light is like darkness. David referred to Sheol as the land of forgetfulness because you're eventually forgotten by those who are living. And it's true. I don't remember who my great-grandparents were. I don't even know their names. Only one of my great-grandparents was alive when I was born, and that was on my father's side. And I have this faint remembrance of going over to Grandma Nolan's, and my granny's bed was in the living room. She was bedridden, but she didn't want to miss out on conversations. That's all I can remember, besides that she actually used snuff and stunk. But if you ask me what was her name, I don't remember. Eventually, the living forget those who have died. And that's what David was saying. Now, in the New Testament, the Hebrew word Sheol is translated as Hades. And it bears resemblance to the Hades of Greek mythology in that it had two compartments. The first was a place of torment where the souls of the wicked were sent, and the second was called the bosom of Abraham. It's where the souls of those who believed in Yahweh and the coming of the promised Messiah were sent. This compartment was also referred to as paradise. Yeah, a.k.a. paradise. If you remember, Jesus told the thief on the cross, today, you will be with me in paradise. Most people don't understand what he's saying. They think that he's saying, today you're going to be with me in heaven. No, Jesus didn't ascend to heaven until after the resurrection. When he said, today you'll be with me in paradise, he's talking about the bosom of Abraham, which is a compartment in Sheol. So he wasn't talking about heaven as most people think. So it was a blissful place of comfort and security as opposed to the other side, which was a place of torment. In fact, Jesus gave us some great insight as to what the two components of Sheol were like. Turn with me, if you would, to the book of Luke, chapter 16. We're going to read verses 19 through 26, and I want you to follow along as I read this passage of Scripture. It says, now there was a certain rich man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen. Now, the reason it brings out purple is because that was a very costly, very expensive dye. Only those who were very wealthy, and usually just those who were royalty, had things that were made of purple. That's why it brings this out. There was a certain rich man, and he was habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, gaily living in splendor every day. Nice home, up-to-date chariot, anything and everything that you would want. Swimming pool, yeah. And a certain poor man named Lazarus was laid at his gate, covered with sores, and longing to be fed with the crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. If only. Besides, even the dogs were coming and licking his sores. Gross. Dogs will do that, though. Now it came about that the poor man died, and he was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, that's the Greek word for Sheol. And in Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment. And he saw Abraham far away, and Lazarus in his bosom. Anyone know why they called it the bosom of Abraham? Because supposedly any Jew that died who believed in Yahweh and also believed in the coming of the promised Messiah, when they went to paradise, Abraham was there to greet them, and the first thing he did was give them a big old hug. So it was referred to as Abraham's bosom. So he saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. There's him giving Lazarus this big hug. Have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus received bad things. But now he is being comforted here, and you're in agony. His life is better off. Yours is not. And besides all this, between us and you, there's a great chasm fixed, in order that those who wish to come over from here to you may not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. Now, obviously, this is a parable. It's a fictitious story that's used to illustrate certain spiritual truths. That's what a parable is. In this case, it's illustrating spiritual truths about the afterlife. We want to know what the afterlife is like? Jesus tells us a parable. Its purpose is to illustrate certain spiritual truths about the afterlife. Yeah, what happens when a person dies? Now, remember, parables are allegorical in nature. That means that the people, things, or events in the parable are symbolic. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is that the characters are symbolic, but what the two men experience in this parable in the afterlife is not symbolic. In other words, the men are fictional, but what they experience is factual. Let me say that again because that's very important. The men in the parable are fictitious, but what they experience is factual. It's what really happened to a person in the Old Testament when they died. In fact, the name Lazarus, let me go a little bit further. Lazarus represents believers. The name Lazarus means God is my helper. So Lazarus represents those who trust in God and depend on him for their salvation. The rich man symbolizes unbelievers. Now, that doesn't mean that rich people can't be Christians. That is not what this parable is saying. In fact, most of the patriarchs in the Bible were very rich. Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, they were very rich. Job, David, and Solomon, they were filthy rich. In fact, Solomon was so rich that silver was despised in his kingdom because gold was so abundant. And when you read what his kingdom had, and every year how much it increased in wealth, it's like, who is this guy? Bill Gates was never as rich. Warren Buffett was never as rich as Solomon. Yeah. The Apostle John came from a very wealthy and influential family, to the point that they were a regular guest at the high priest's home while John was growing up. And many of the disciples came from wealthy families. You don't ever hear that because most people just repeat what pastors say who've never really studied it out. But I want you to understand something. Jesus was not dissing rich people. But the truth is, most rich people don't trust in God. They trust in their riches. So that's why the rich man represents unbelievers. Now, I want you to notice that when Lazarus died, his soul went to the bosom of Abraham where he was comforted. When the rich man died, his soul went to the place of torment. Now, both of these places were in Sheol, but they were on different sides. The bosom of Abraham was a place of comfort, and it was on one side of Sheol. On the other side was the place of torment. And there was a chasm between the two, and it kept people from crossing over from one side to the other. You couldn't get from one side to the other. If you ended up in the place of torment, there was no way that you could get to the side where Abraham's bosom was, because this great chasm was fixed, and it kept people from crossing over. Look back at Luke chapter 16, verses 22 through 26, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. That came about that Lazarus died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom, and the rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, what's Hades? The Greek word for Sheol. And in Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, And he saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. But now he's being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this is the part I want you to see. Between us and you, there's a great chasm fixed, in order that those who wish to come over from there to us, or from here to you, may not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. So, prior to Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, this is what happened to a person who died. Look at the back wall. This is a timeline, and it starts with the fall. Why does it start with the fall? Because there was no death prior to Adam and Eve's sin. Had they not sinned, they would have lived forever. But once they sinned, death came upon this world, and death was passed on to all men. So we start at the fall. Sheol, it's already there. Someone's already taken to what I want. Can you go all the way back without the coffins? Thank you. Right there is the cross. The cross symbolizes the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, before the cross, you were in a period called the Old Testament, the Old Covenant. After the Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, he initiated the New Covenant, what we call the New Testament. Now, when a person died, their soul went to Sheol. So what happened if a person died? They were buried, but their soul went to the bosom of Abraham if they believed in God and the coming of the promised Messiah. If they didn't believe in God, their body was buried, but their soul went to a place of torment. Now, in between these two places, all of this is Sheol, but there is a great chasm between the two. That chasm kept people from crossing over from the place of torment to the bosom of Abraham, or likewise. I don't know why anyone would want to cross over to the place of torment, but that's what happened to people that died during the Old Testament period. So, just keep this in mind. Before the death of Jesus Christ, the death, burial, and resurrection, everyone who died went to Sheol.